I stood in front of my house, staring at the sold sign that had just been erected. It was a bittersweet moment, filled with a mix of emotions. I had lived in that house for over 3 decades, raising my family and creating countless memories. My wife had passed away a few years ago, and my children had long since moved out to start their own families. As I walked back to my car, I couldn't help but think about my son, who I hadn't spoken to in 17 years. We had a falling out, and he had made it clear that he wanted nothing to do with me. I had tried to reach out to him over the years, but he had always rejected my attempts. I got into my car and started the engine, feeling a sense of relief wash over me. I had just sold my house for $420,000, and I was finally going to be able to live the life I had always wanted. I had always dreamed of traveling and exploring the world, but my wife's passing had put those plans on hold. As I drove away from the house, I felt a sense of freedom that I hadn't felt in years. I was finally going to be able to do all the things I had always wanted to do, and I was excited to see what the future held. But as I was driving, my phone rang. I looked at the caller ID and saw that it was my son. My heart skipped a beat as I hesitated for a moment before answering. Hello, I said, trying to sound calm. Dad, I'm coming over to discuss my cut, he said, his voice cold and detached. I was taken aback by his words. What did he mean by my cut? I had sold the house and was finally going to be able to live the life I wanted, but I hadn't expected my son to show up out of the blue and demand a share of the money. What are you talking about, I asked, trying to keep my cool. You know exactly what I'm talking about, he said. I'm coming over to discuss my share of the $420,000 you just got from selling the house, I was shocked by his words. How did he even know about the sale of the house? And what made him think he was entitled to a share of the money? I didn't know what to say, so I just sat there in silence, waiting for him to arrive. As I sat in my car, waiting for my son to arrive, I couldn't help but think about the past and all the mistakes I had made. I had always tried to do my best as a father, but somehow, things had gone terribly wrong. I looked in the rearview mirror and saw my son's car pulling up behind me. My heart sank as I realized that this was just the beginning of a long and difficult conversation. I took a deep breath and got out of the car, preparing myself for the confrontation that was about to ensue. But as I looked at my son, I saw something in his eyes that gave me a glimmer of hope. Maybe, just maybe, this was an opportunity for us to finally put the past behind us and start anew. As I looked at my son, I saw something in his eyes that gave me a glimmer of hope. Maybe, just maybe, this was an opportunity for us to finally put the past behind us and start anew. But as he got out of the car and approached me, his expression turned cold and hard. So, you're just going to sell the house and not even think about me, he said, his voice dripping with resentment. I didn't think you wanted anything to do with me, I replied, trying to keep my cool. That's not the point, he snapped. The point is that you're just going to take all that money and do whatever you want with it, without even considering me. I'm your father, I said, trying to reason with him. I've always done what I thought was best for you, even when you didn't appreciate it. Best for me, he repeated, his voice rising. You call abandoning me and my mother best for me? You call ignoring me for 17 years best for me? I felt a surge of anger and hurt at his words, but I tried to keep my temper in check. I'm sorry, son, I said. I know I wasn't there for you when you needed me, but I'm trying to make it right now. By selling the house and taking all the money, he sneered. That's not making it right, that's just being selfish. I took a deep breath and tried to calm down. I knew that my son was hurting, and I didn't want to make things worse. Let's go inside and talk about this, I said. We can figure something out. But as we walked towards the house, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was walking into a trap. My son's words had cut deep, and I knew that he wasn't going to let up any time soon. As we sat down in the living room, I tried to explain my side of the story. I told him about how I had struggled to make ends meet after his mother left, and how I had sacrificed everything for him and his siblings. But my son wasn't interested in hearing it. "You're just trying to justify yourself," he said, his voice cold and hard. "You're not taking responsibility for your actions." I felt a surge of anger at his words, but I tried to keep my cool. "I am taking responsibility," I said. "I'm trying to make amends and move forward." But my son just shook his head. "You're not taking responsibility," he repeated. "You're just trying to buy your way out of it." I realized that my son was determined to make me feel guilty, and I wasn't going to be able to reason with him. So I decided to take a different approach. "Okay, son," I said. "I hear you. I understand that you're hurt and angry. But I want you to know that I'm willing to do whatever it takes to make things right between us." My son looked at me skeptically, but I could see a glimmer of hope in his eyes. Maybe, just maybe, we could work things out after all. But just as I was starting to feel hopeful, my son dropped a bombshell. "I'm not just talking about the money," he said. "I'm talking about something much bigger than that." I felt a surge of fear at his words. What could he possibly mean? What could be bigger than the $420,000 I had just received from the sale of the house? "What are you talking about?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. But my son just smiled, a cold and calculating smile. "You'll find out soon enough," he said. And with that, he stood up and walked out of the house, leaving me feeling confused and scared. What had I just gotten myself into? I sat in the living room, feeling stunned and confused. What had my son just said? What could be bigger than the $420,000 I had just received from the sale of the house? I tried to think back to our conversation, to see if I had missed something, but my mind was a blank. I got up and walked to the window, looking out at the street where my son had just disappeared. I felt a sense of unease, a feeling that something was off. I didn't know what my son was planning, but I knew it couldn't be good. I tried to shake off the feeling, telling myself that I was just being paranoid. But as I turned back to the room, I saw something that made my heart skip a beat. On the coffee table, my son had left a piece of paper with a single sentence written on it: "You owe me $1 million." I felt like I had been punched in the gut. What was my son talking about? How could I possibly owe him $1 million? I thought back to our conversation, trying to remember if he had mentioned anything about money, but I couldn't think of anything. I felt a sense of panic rising up inside me. What was going on? What did my son want from me? I tried to calm myself down, telling myself that I would figure it out, but my mind was racing. I thought about calling my son, asking him to explain what was going on, but something held me back. I didn't know what to say, or how to react. I felt like I was walking into a trap, and I didn't know how to get out. As I stood there, frozen in uncertainty, I heard a knock at the door. It was a soft, hesitant knock, and I knew that it was probably someone who didn't want to disturb me. But I also knew that I had to answer it. I took a deep breath and walked to the door, opening it to reveal a woman I didn't recognize. She was tall and slender, with long brown hair and piercing green eyes. She looked like she was in her mid-30s, and she had a kind, gentle face. "Hi," she said, smiling. "My name is Sarah. I'm a friend of your son's." I felt a surge of surprise, but I tried to keep my cool. "Hi Sarah," I said. "What brings you here?" Sarah hesitated, looking uncertain. "I don't know if I should be here," she said. "But I felt like I had to come. Your son is in trouble, and I think you're the only one who can help him." I felt a sense of alarm, but I tried to stay calm. What kind of trouble? I asked. Sarah looked around nervously, as if she was afraid of being overheard. I don't know if I should say, she said. But I think you need to know. Your son is in deep financial trouble. He owes a lot of money to some very bad people, and they're not happy with him. I felt like I had been punched in the gut again. What was going on? How could my son be in such deep trouble? And what did it have to do with the $1 million he was demanding from me? I looked at Sarah, trying to read her expression. She seemed sincere, but I couldn't be sure. What do you want me to do? I asked. Sarah hesitated, looking uncertain. I don't know, she said. But I think you need to talk to your son. He's not thinking clearly, and he's making some very bad decisions. I nodded, feeling a sense of determination. I was going to get to the bottom of this, no matter what it took. I'll talk to him, I said. But I need to know more. What's going on, Sarah? What's really going on? Sarah looked around the room nervously, as if she was afraid of being overheard. I shouldn't be telling you this, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. But I think you have a right to know. Your son is in deep trouble, and it's not just about the money. There are people involved, people who will stop at nothing to get what they want. I felt a chill run down my spine as I listened to her words. What kind of people was she talking about? And what did they want from my son? What kind of people? I asked, my voice firm. Sarah hesitated, looking around the room again. I don't know if I should say, she said. But I think you need to know. Your son has been involved with some very unsavory characters. They're the kind of people who will do whatever it takes to get what they want, and they don't care who they hurt in the process. I felt a surge of anger and fear as I listened to her words. What had my son gotten himself into? And how could I protect him? What do you mean? I asked, my voice shaking with emotion. Sarah took a deep breath and began to explain. Your son has been involved with a group of people who are into some very shady dealings. They're the kind of people who will do whatever it takes to make a profit, even if it means hurting others. And they've got your son right where they want him. I felt like I had been punched in the gut. What had my son gotten himself into? And how could I get him out of it? What can I do? I asked, feeling desperate. Sarah looked at me with a serious expression. You need to talk to your son, she said. You need to find out what's going on and get him out of this situation before it's too late. I nodded, feeling a sense of determination. I was going to get to the bottom of this, no matter what it took. I was going to find out what was going on and get my son out of this situation, even if it meant putting myself in harm's way. I looked at Sarah, feeling a sense of gratitude. Thank you, I said. Thank you for telling me this. Sarah smiled, looking relieved. I'm just glad I could help, she said. But you need to be careful. These people are not to be trusted. They will stop at nothing to get what they want, and they won't hesitate to hurt anyone who gets in their way. I nodded, feeling a sense of fear. I knew that I had to be careful, but I also knew that I had to act. I had to find out what was going on and get my son out of this situation before it was too late. I stood up, feeling a sense of determination. I'll talk to my son, I said. I'll find out what's going on and get him out of this situation. Sarah nodded, looking serious. Be careful, she said. These people are not to be trusted. I nodded, feeling a sense of fear. I knew that I had to be careful, but I also knew that I had to act. I had to find out what was going on and get my son out of this situation before it was too late. I walked Sarah to the door, feeling a sense of gratitude. Thank you, I said. Thank you for telling me this. Sarah smiled, looking relieved. I'm just glad I could help, she said. But you need to be careful. These people are not to be trusted. I nodded, feeling a sense of fear. I knew that I had to be careful, but I also knew that I had to act. I had to find out what was going on and get my son out of this situation before it was too late. As I closed the door behind Sarah, I felt a sense of determination. I was going to get to the bottom of this, no matter what it took. I was going to find out what was going on and get my son out of this situation, even if it meant putting myself in harm's way. I took a deep breath and began to think about what I needed to do next. I needed to talk to my son, to find out what was going on and get him out of this situation. But I also knew that I needed to be careful. These people were not to be trusted, and I didn't want to put myself or my son in harm's way. I thought about what Sarah had said, about the kind of people my son was involved with. They were the kind of people who would stop at nothing to get what they wanted, and they wouldn't hesitate to hurt anyone who got in their way. I felt a sense of fear as I thought about this, but I also knew that I had to act. I had to find out what was going on and get my son out of this situation before it was too late. I took a deep breath and began to think about what I needed to do next. I needed to talk to my son, to find out what was going on and get him out of this situation. But I also knew that I needed to be careful. These people were not to be trusted, and I didn't want to put myself or my son in harm's way. As I stood there, thinking about what to do next, I heard a noise behind me. It was a soft, hesitant knock at the door. I felt a sense of surprise, wondering who it could be. I walked to the door, feeling a sense of caution. As I opened the door, I saw my son standing there, looking nervous and scared. My son looked at me with a mixture of fear and desperation in his eyes. "Dad, I need to talk to you," he said, his voice shaking. I felt a surge of concern and opened the door wider, allowing him to enter. "What's going on, son?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. My son hesitated, looking around the room nervously. "I don't know where to start," he said. "But I think I'm in trouble. Big trouble." I felt a chill run down my spine as I listened to his words. What kind of trouble could he be in? And what did it have to do with the $1 million he had demanded from me? What kind of trouble? I asked, trying to keep my voice firm. My son took a deep breath and began to explain. "I've been involved with some people, Dad. People who aren't very nice. They're the kind of people who will do whatever it takes to get what they want, and they won't hesitate to hurt anyone who gets in their way." I felt a sense of alarm as I listened to his words. This was exactly what Sarah had told me. My son was involved with some very unsavory characters, and they were using him for their own gain. "What do you mean?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. My son hesitated, looking around the room nervously. "I don't know if I should say," he said. "But I think you need to know. They're after me, Dad. They're after me, and they won't stop until they get what they want." I felt a surge of fear as I listened to his words. What did these people want from my son? And how could I protect him? What do they want? I asked, trying to keep my voice firm. My son hesitated, looking at me with a mixture of fear and desperation in his eyes. "They want the $1 million, Dad," he said. "They want the $1 million that I demanded from you." I felt like I had been punched in the gut. What was going on? Why did these people want the $1 million? And what did it have to do with my son? Why do they want the $1 million? I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. My son hesitated, looking around the room nervously. "I don't know," he said. "But I think it has something to do with a deal that they made. A deal that went sour." I felt a sense of confusion as I listened to his words. What kind of deal could have gone sour? And what did it have to do with the $1 million? What kind of deal? I asked, trying to keep my voice firm. My son hesitated, looking at me with a mixture of fear and desperation in his eyes. I don't know if I should say, he said. But I think you need to know. They made a deal with someone, Dad. A deal that involved a lot of money. And now they're after me, because they think I can get it for them. I felt a surge of anger and fear as I listened to his words. Who were these people, and what kind of deal had they made? And what did it have to do with my son? I knew that I had to get to the bottom of this, no matter what it took. I had to find out what was going on and get my son out of this situation before it was too late. We'll figure this out, son, I said, trying to keep my voice calm. We'll get to the bottom of this and get you out of this situation. My son looked at me with a mixture of hope and desperation in his eyes. Thank you, Dad, he said. Thank you for trying to help me. I smiled, trying to reassure him. I'll always be here for you, son, I said. No matter what. But as I looked into his eyes, I knew that I was in for the fight of my life. I was going to have to face these people, and I was going to have to get my son out of this situation. And I was going to have to do it without knowing what I was up against. As I looked into my son's eyes, I knew that I had to take action. I couldn't just sit back and wait for these people to come after us. I had to do something to protect my son and myself. We need to get out of here, I said, my voice firm. We need to get out of this house and find a safe place to hide. My son nodded, his eyes wide with fear. Where can we go? He asked. I thought for a moment, trying to come up with a plan. We couldn't go to the police, not yet. We didn't know what these people were capable of, and I didn't want to put my son in danger. We'll go to my friend's house, I said. He's a good guy, and he'll help us out. My son nodded, and we quickly gathered our things and left the house. As we drove away, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. I kept looking in the rearview mirror, expecting to see someone following us. But there was no one. We arrived at my friend's house, and I breathed a sigh of relief. We were safe, for now. But I knew that we couldn't stay here forever. We had to come up with a plan to take down these people and get our lives back to normal. My friend, John, greeted us warmly and asked what was going on. I filled him in on the situation, and he listened intently. I'll help you, he said. We'll figure out what's going on and get these people off your back. I nodded, feeling a sense of gratitude towards him. With John's help, we started to make a plan. We would gather information, try to find out who these people were and what they wanted. And then, we would take action. We would do whatever it took to get our lives back to normal. But as we sat down to make a plan, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were in over our heads. These people were powerful, and they would stop at nothing to get what they wanted. I looked at my son, and he looked back at me with fear in his eyes. I knew that I had to protect him, no matter what. I would do whatever it took to keep him safe. As we sat there, making our plan, I couldn't help but think about the $1 million. What did it have to do with all of this? And who were these people, really? I knew that I had to find out, and I was determined to do just that. But as we sat there, making our plan, I heard a noise outside. It was a faint rustling sound, like someone was trying to sneak up on us. I looked at John, and he looked at me with a concerned expression. What was that? He whispered. I shook my head, my heart racing. I don't know, I whispered back. We sat there in silence, listening to the sound. It was getting louder, and I knew that we had to do something. We couldn't just sit there and wait for whoever it was to come to us. We had to take action. I looked at my son, and he looked back at me with fear in his eyes. I knew that I had to protect him, no matter what. I would do whatever it took to keep him safe. And with that, I stood up and walked to the window. I looked out, trying to see who was making the noise. And what I saw made my blood run cold. As I looked out the window, I saw a group of men, dressed in black, sneaking up on the house. They were armed and looked like they meant business. I felt a surge of fear and adrenaline as I realized that they had found us. I quickly turned around and grabbed my son, pulling him away from the window. "Get down," I whispered, trying to stay calm. "They're here." My son's eyes went wide with fear as he looked at me, and I could see the panic rising up in him. But I knew that I had to stay calm, for his sake. I quickly grabbed John's attention, and we both knew what we had to do. We had to get my son to safety, no matter what. We quickly moved him to the back of the house, away from the windows and doors. I could hear the men outside, trying to break in. They were shouting and screaming, trying to intimidate us. But I knew that we couldn't let them get to us. We had to stay strong and fight back. John and I stood guard, ready to defend my son at all costs. We knew that we were outnumbered, but we were determined to protect him. As the men tried to break in, I could feel my anger and fear rising up. How could they do this to us? How could they put my son in danger like this? But as I looked at my son, I knew that I had to stay focused. I had to keep him safe, no matter what. And then, just as the men were about to break in, I heard a loud noise. It was the sound of sirens, getting closer and closer. The men outside looked at each other, confused and scared. They didn't know what was happening. And then, just as suddenly as it had started, everything stopped. The men ran away, disappearing into the night. The sirens got louder and louder, until I could see the flashing lights of the police cars outside. John and I looked at each other, relieved and exhausted. We had done it. We had kept my son safe. As the police came in, I could see the looks of shock and horror on their faces. They had seen the men running away, and they knew what had happened. They quickly took my son into protective custody, and I knew that he was safe. I was finally able to breathe a sigh of relief, knowing that the nightmare was over. As I looked at my son, I could see the fear and trauma in his eyes. But I also saw something else, a sense of hope and resilience. He had been through something terrible, but he was going to be okay. And as I hugged him tightly, I knew that I would do anything to keep him safe. Anything. The police took us to a safe house, where we could stay until the men were caught and brought to justice. As we sat there, waiting for news, I couldn't help but think about the $1 million. What had it all been for? Why had those men been so desperate to get it? And then, just as I was thinking about it, the police came in with a surprise. They had caught the men, and they had found out what the $1 million was for. It was a bribe, a payoff to keep quiet about something big. Something that could bring down a whole corporation. And as I listened to the police explain, I couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction. Karma had finally caught up with those men, and they were going to pay for what they had done. My son and I were safe, and we were going to be okay. We had been through a nightmare, but we had come out on top. And as I looked at my son, I knew that I would always be there to protect him, no matter what.